The HOA fined me $14,000 for building the wrong dam. The very dam that for 15 years has been protecting their new neighborhood of 47 houses. They called the memorial I built for my late wife a mud pile and gave me an ultimatum: tear it down or face ruin. So I gave them exactly what they wanted. I took it down and let nature handle the rest. But what the HOA president didn't realize is that this was never about a dam. It was about what she was secretly planning to build on my property the second it was gone. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, because you're about to see a flood of sweet, sweet justice. And if you believe homeowners have the right to protect their own land, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the moment justice comes crashing down. For 15 years, the dam held. It wasn't much to look at if you didn't know what you were seeing. Just a wide, gentle slope of earth, packed and reinforced the way the Army taught me, covered in the wildflowers my wife May planted every spring before she passed. Bluebells, Indian paintbrush, black-eyed Susans. To most people, it was just a hill. To me, it was a promise. I remembered the last big storm, the one they called a 50-year flood. I stood on my back porch and watched that seasonal creek turn into a brown, roaring monster. It took my workshop, ripped it right off its foundation, and sent my tools bobbing toward the county line. My old dog, Duke, was nearly swept away. The water came within inches of the house. After the creek receded, leaving a foot of mud and ruin everywhere, I swore it would never happen again. I spent the next 6 months building that dam with my own 2 hands. I planned it, surveyed it, and packed every cubic foot of earth myself. It wasn't just about stopping the water. It was about building something permanent in a world that had taken the most permanent thing from me. Every spring since, when the rains came, the dam did its job. The creek would swell, push against the base, and then settle. And on the other side, the wildflowers would bloom, a sea of color right where May had scattered the seeds. Then came the new neighborhood. Downstream from me, on the other side of the county road, a developer bought up 200 acres of floodplain. 47 houses went up in less than a year, all beige siding and identical 2-car garages. They called it Creekside Estates, which was a fancy name for land that had been underwater twice in my lifetime. I didn't pay them much mind. My property line was my property line. I wasn't part of their homeowners association and didn't want to be. I just waved at the construction crews and minded my own business. The first sign of trouble came in a crisp white envelope, left in my mailbox without a stamp. It was a community welcome and standards pamphlet from the Creekside Estates HOA. Inside was a list of rules, approved fence colors, lawn maintenance schedules, holiday decoration timelines. I tossed it in the trash. It didn't apply to me. A week later, a silver luxury SUV pulled up my long gravel driveway. A woman got out, dressed in clothes that cost more than my property taxes. She had perfectly styled hair, sunglasses the size of dinner plates, and a clipboard she held like a shield. "Can I help you?" I asked from my porch. Buddy, my new golden retriever, gave a low growl from beside me. "I'm Linda Vandermeer, president of the Creekside HOA," she announced. Not looking at me, but at my house, her nose wrinkled slightly. A man in a clean work shirt and a branded polo got out of her passenger side, avoiding eye contact. "We need to discuss your unpermitted water retention feature." I had to stop myself from laughing. "My what?" "Your dam," she said, pointing the clipboard at it. "It's non-compliant. Our certified drainage consultants have identified it as the primary source of visual disruption to the community's drainage symmetry." I had no idea what a single one of those words meant together. "It needs to be removed. We have an approved design for a concrete culvert system you'll need to install at your expense." I walked down the steps, motioning for Buddy to stay. I kept my voice calm and even, an old habit from the service. You never let them see you sweat. "Ma'am, You're on private property. And that dam has a county permit from 2008. It was engineered to withstand a 100-year flood event, which is more than I can say for those new houses you all built in a natural runoff channel. I tried to hand her a bit of neighborly advice, one last time. You might want your consultants to look at the FEMA flood maps before you start worrying about my visuals. She didn't even glance at me. She just made a note on her clipboard. Our community covenants supersede outdated county filings, she said, a line she'd clearly rehearsed. This earthen pile is an eyesore and a liability. You'll be hearing from us. She and her silent contractor got back in their climate-controlled SUV and drove away, kicking up dust. I went inside and pulled out the old file. The thick folder was filled with the original county permits, the soil density reports, the hydrology surveys, and the final inspection certificate signed by the county engineer himself. I had everything. Facts, data, proof. I figured that was the end of it. Some new power-tripping HOA president trying to throw her weight around. She'd go back, talk to a lawyer, and find out she had no authority on my land. But I underestimated her arrogance. 4 days later, the mail carrier handed me a certified letter. My heart sank a little. Nothing good ever comes in a certified letter. I signed for it, went inside, and sat at the kitchen table. Inside was a formal, final notice of violation from the HOA. It was printed on heavy, important-feeling paper. It accused me of maintaining an unauthorized environmental obstruction and cited a dozen bylaws from an HOA I didn't belong to. And at the bottom of the page, in bold letters, was the fine. $14,000, payable within 30 days. Below that, a final sentence promised that failure to comply would result in immediate litigation and liens placed against my property. My hands started to shake, not with fear, but with a cold, slow-burning rage. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about drainage symmetry or visual disruptions. This was a shakedown. Linda Vandermeer had declared war on me, on my land, and on the one piece of this world I'd built to honor my wife. She thought a letter and a big number could scare an old soldier off his own hill. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I spent the next 2 days trying to push the anger down and let the logic take over. But every time I looked out the kitchen window at the dam, I didn't just see a mound of earth. I saw May, on her hands and knees, pressing wildflower seeds into the soil. I saw her face that night, lit by a flickering flashlight beam, as the creek roared just feet from our door. She'd put her hand on my arm, her knuckles white. "Jack, it's not stopping," she'd whispered, her voice tight with a fear I'd never heard from her before. We'd stood there for hours, helpless, watching the water rise, listening to the awful sound of tree roots snapping and the workshop groaning as the flood tore it apart. In the Army, I'd learned there was always a countermove, always a plan. But against that water, I had nothing. I was just a man watching his life get washed away. The dam was my countermove. It was my answer to that night. And now a real estate agent with a clipboard was telling me to tear it down. No, I wouldn't let this happen on a piece of paper. I would go to them. I would make them understand. The HOA meeting was held in the Subdivision's new community center, a sterile room that smelled like fresh paint and cheap carpet. I was the only person there not wearing a collared shirt. They all looked at me like I'd tracked mud in, which, given the dirt under my nails, wasn't entirely wrong. I sat in the back, my file of permits and reports resting on my lap. Linda Vandermeer stood at a cheap lectern at the front, smiling a practiced, toothy smile. She went through the agenda, minutes from the last meeting, a lengthy debate about the approved shade of beige for mailbox posts, and a complaint about someone putting their trash cans out 3 hours too early. Finally, she got to new business, non-compliant structure, adjoining property. That was me. "As you all know," she began, her voice dripping with faux concern, "we have been addressing a significant safety and aesthetic issue posed by an unapproved obstruction on the property bordering our community. She looked right at me. "Mr. McRae is here to speak. He has 5 minutes." I walked to the front, put my file on the lectern, and faced the room of blank stares. "My name is Jack McRae," I started, keeping my voice low and steady. "I'm a retired combat engineer with the Army Corps. Forgive me for being blunt, but your houses are built on a floodplain. I've lived here for 40 years. I've seen this creek put 10 feet of water where your manicured lawns are now." I opened the file and pulled out an 8x10 photo of the last big flood. It showed my property, the county road, and the 200 acres where their houses now stood. All of it a swirling brown lake. A few people in the front row shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I pulled out another paper. "This is the hydrology report I commissioned before building my dam. It shows a natural runoff funnel that directs storm surge right through this area. My dam interrupts that funnel. It has successfully, for 15 years, diverted floodwaters away from this land." I looked from face to face. "The only reason your neighborhood exists without floating away is because of that dam." As a tender, I thought the logic would land. I thought the photos would be undeniable. I was wrong. Linda stepped forward, placing her hand condescendingly on my shoulder. "Thank you, Jack, for sharing your personal history," she said, her voice full of pity. She turned back to the crowd. "What Mr. McRae calls a dam is, according to our certified drainage consultants, nothing more than a dangerous mud pile." A nervous chuckle rippled through the room. "It's unstabilized, uninspected, and an imminent threat. Our consultants, who are licensed professionals, assure us that the developer's modern, aesthetically pleasing culvert system is more than adequate for seasonal runoff." Someone from the back called out, "So what's the county say?" Linda's smile widened. She gestured to a young man in a wrinkled county polo shirt sitting nervously in the corner. He looked like he'd just gotten his degree last week. "Our new county engineer, Mr. Davies, has reviewed our contractor's report." "Mr. Davies?" The kid stood up, shuffling his feet. Yes," he stammered, not looking at me. "Based on the geotechnical survey provided by the Creekside Estates contractor, the earthen structure is not in compliance with current county code. A notice of removal will be issued." The room was silent. He'd sided with them. With their paid-for report over my 15 years of proven success, I had been ambushed. This wasn't a meeting. It was a verdict. They hadn't come to listen. They'd come to watch the old man get put in his place. Linda patted my arm again. "So there you have it," she said to the room. "We're giving Mr. McRae 30 days to remove the obstruction, or daily fines will be imposed by the county." The meeting was over. They started talking about the potluck next weekend. No one looked at me. I packed up my files, the photos, the permits, the reports that didn't matter, and walked out into the cool evening air. I stood alone in the parking lot, looking past their identical beige houses toward my own land. They only exist because that dam held. The simple truth of it hit me like a physical blow. They had just celebrated a victory over the one thing that was protecting them. If they think that dam's the problem, let's see how they like the solution. The next morning, I didn't waste time with anger. Anger clouds your judgment. I'd learned that lesson the hard way in places a lot worse than a suburban cul-de-sac. Instead, I started preparing. I woke up at sunrise, brewed a pot of coffee black as tar, and walked out to the dam with Buddy at my heels. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't looking at it as a protector. I was looking at it as an asset I was about to liquidate. I spent 2 hours inspecting every foot of that packed earth. I knew its strong points and its weak points like the back of my hand. I knew where the soil was most dense, where the runoff pressure was greatest during a heavy storm. With a can of bright red marking paint, the kind surveyors use, I started making lines. Not just random marks, but precise, calculated, chalk lines indicating structural stress points and load-bearing sections. To anyone else, it would look like I was getting ready for a repair. To an engineer, it would look like I was mapping out a demolition. I brought the old tractor out of the barn and parked it near the base, then went to work on my front gate. The simple chain and padlock I'd always used was replaced with a heavy-duty industrial steel gate, the kind they use at storage yards, with a combination lock even a bolt cutter would have trouble with. From this point forward, anyone coming onto my land would be an invited guest or a criminal. Buddy sat in the shade, watching me work. I scratched him behind the ears. "Well, boy," I muttered, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Looks like the old dam is getting an early retirement." He just thumped his tail. Dogs are smart. They know when the tone in your voice changes for good. My nearest neighbor, Marty Jensen, drove his beat-up truck over that afternoon. Marty was an old lineman, the kind of guy who knew every wire and pole in a 50-mile radius and had a strong distrust for anyone in a clean shirt telling him how to do his job. He'd helped me run power to my barn years ago, and we'd been friends ever since. He handed me a cold beer from a cooler in his truck bed. "Saw the new gate," he said, skipping the small talk. "Figured the welcome wagon from Creekside finally wore you down." "Something like that," I said, taking a long drink. Marty leaned against his truck. "You should know. They're spreading stuff around. A few of the folks I talked to, they said that Linda woman is telling people you're unstable. An angry old vet who's being difficult. Said she's circulating some kind of petition to have the county declare you a dangerous holdout." He spit on the ground. "She's trying to paint you as a crazy person so they can get what they really want." I looked at him. "And what's that?" "An easement," Marty said, his eyes hard. "They want to build a public greenbelt, one of those fancy walking trails with benches and little doggy waste stations. Right through the edge of your property, along the creek. The dam's in the way. It's a land grab, Jack. The fines, the county engineer, all of it. It's just the excuse." It clicked. The whole thing made a sickening kind of sense. The visual disruption wasn't the dam. It was my property line. They didn't want a concrete culvert. They wanted my land for their weekend jogging path. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the afternoon heat. This was bigger and uglier than I thought. I finished the beer in one swallow. "Thanks, Marty. Good to know." He just nodded, got in his truck, and left. He knew I didn't need advice. I needed ammunition. That night, the preparation got serious. Marty came back over after dark with a box of equipment. We spent 3 hours setting up a series of small, weatherproof surveillance cameras. One pointed at the new gate, one covering the access road, and 2 more giving a wide view of the dam from different angles. They were motion activated and recorded to a hard drive I kept locked in my office safe. I wasn't just building a case anymore. I was setting a trap. The next step felt like a betrayal. Every fall, I'd walk the dam, patching the little spots of erosion, checking the spillway, making sure it was ready for the winter rains. This year, I did nothing. I packed up all my maintenance gear, the shovels, the tamper, the bags of soil conditioner, and locked it all in the barn. I saw a few small fissures starting to form from the dry summer heat and forced myself to walk away. Letting it go felt wrong, like watching a friend get sick and doing nothing to help. The final piece of the puzzle was the most important. I went online and found my property on the county's interactive FEMA map. Just as I remembered, my house was safely in Zone X, low risk. The Creekside Estates neighborhood, however, was a patchwork of blue and orange, high-risk floodplains and special flood hazard areas. I took screenshots. Then I called my insurance agent. I told him I wanted to renew my flood insurance policy, the same one I'd carried for 20 years. It was cheap, almost laughably so, because the dam made my property a zero-risk bet. He renewed it without a second thought. I had my permit, I had my documentation, and now I had my insurance paid in full. I had done my due diligence. I had complied. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the pieces to fall, right where I knew they would. The 30-day notice was ticking down like a bomb. With about a week left, Linda Vandermeer escalated. She called an emergency HOA meeting, which Marty told me was mostly her fanning the flames of fear. She pushed a vote to hire a high-priced law firm to file for a county injunction against me. It passed unanimously. The next day, a van from a local news station pulled up to the entrance of Creekside Estates. I watched from my porch through a pair of old military binoculars. Linda stood in front of the manicured sign, a microphone clipped to her blazer, looking every bit the concerned community leader. She pointed in the direction of my property and spoke with a shaky, practiced voice about the reclusive and angry veteran who was threatening the safety of their families by refusing to remove a dangerous, illegal structure. They edited the clip to make me sound like some kind of monster, a crazy old coot hoarding a mud pile out of spite. The story ran on the 6 o'clock news. My phone rang a few minutes later. It was my niece, Sarah, the only close family I had left. "Uncle Jack, I just saw you on the news," she said, her voice tight with worry. "What is going on? They're making you sound awful." I tried to explain the situation calmly. The land grab, the fake reports, the HOA's real motives, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. She was a city girl. To her, an HOA was just a normal part of life, like traffic or high rent. The idea that one would be actively malicious was hard for her to grasp. "I just worry about you," she said finally. "Maybe it's not worth the fight. Can't you just take it down? Avoid all this drama? Please don't become a headline." Her words hit me harder than the $14,000 fine. She thought I was being stubborn. She thought I was the one making trouble. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked out to the dam and stood at its crest. The wildflowers were gone, withered by the end of summer heat, leaving behind a field of dry stalks. This was May's place. It was the last piece of her I had, and now it was a battleground. Was Sarah right? Was I just being a stubborn old fool, fighting a battle that would only end up costing me everything? The doubt crept in, cold and sharp. For a moment, I felt the fight go out of me. Maybe I should just give them what they wanted. Maybe peace was worth more than pride. The next morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't fight the injunction. I wouldn't wait for the lawyers and the daily fines. I would comply. I fired up the old tractor, the same one I'd used to build the dam, and attached the backhoe. It felt heavy, like I was driving a hearse. I drove it to the top of the dam, right where the main spillway channel was designed to handle overflow. The engine idled, a low grumble in the quiet morning air. Buddy whined at my feet, sensing something was wrong. Taking down the whole dam would take weeks, but I didn't need to take down the whole thing. An engineer doesn't use a sledgehammer when a scalpel will do. I knew exactly where to cut. I lowered the backhoe and took the first bite out of the packed earth, tearing through the roots of May's dead wildflowers. Each scoop felt like I was digging up a memory. It was a clean, deep trench, right across the top. I didn't remove the whole structure, just the crown, just enough to weaken it, just enough to remove its ability to hold back any significant pressure, just enough to let gravity and momentum take the wheel when the time came. After an hour, it was done. A deep, ugly scar ran across the top of what was once a smooth, green hill. It looked broken. I felt broken. I parked the tractor, went inside, and sat at my kitchen table, staring at nothing. I had done what they demanded. The fight was over. I had lost. As I walked away from the mutilated dam for the last time, the camera I'd set up on the old oak tree kept recording. It panned slowly across the scene. The weakened dam, the red demolition lines still visible on its slopes, and beyond it, the creek bed. It was bone dry, as it always was at this time of year. Just a dusty channel of cracked earth and sun-bleached stones snaking its way toward the 47 new houses downstream. They'd never seen the creek in the spring. They'd only ever known this gentle, empty ditch. "They don't even know," I muttered to the empty house. "They don't even know what's coming." The quiet lasted for 7 months. Fall turned into a mild winter, and winter bled into a dry, early spring. The county dropped its injunction threat once I sent them dated photographic proof that I had begun dismantling the non-compliant structure. The HOA sent me a smug letter, acknowledging my progress toward community compliance, and reminded me the full removal was still required. I filed it away with the rest of their nonsense. I didn't hear a word from anyone. They thought they had won. They went back to debating mailbox colors and planning their Greenbelt walking trail. They were so confident in their certified drainage consultants and their aesthetically pleasing culverts. I just watched the weather reports, waiting for the one variable they had never once considered: nature. It came in the second week of April. A massive storm system stalled out over the state, the kind of dark, angry-looking weather system that makes the sky turn a sickly shade of green. The forecasters started using words like historic and unprecedented. The local news ticker running at the bottom of the screen switched from school closures to flash flood warnings. It started as a drizzle, then turned into a steady, driving rain that didn't let up for a full day. I sat on my covered porch with a mug of hot coffee, watching my rain gauge. 1 inch, 2 inches. By nightfall, we were at 5, and it was still coming down in sheets. This was more rain in 24 hours than we usually got in the whole month. It was the kind of storm a dam was built for. And my dam was broken. Around 9 p.m., I started hearing it. A low, distant roar that wasn't thunder. It was the sound of the creek, waking up. The dry, dusty channel I'd been staring at for months was now a churning brown torrent. The water rose fast, clawing at the banks, carrying fallen branches and debris with it. On my side of the road, the water spread out across the low-lying pasture land, just as it was supposed to, losing its energy over a wide area. But downstream, at Creekside Estates, there was nowhere for the water to go. Their beautiful, HOA-approved concrete culverts were designed for a polite little suburban stream, not this monster. My camera footage showed it clearly. The pipes were overwhelmed in less than 90 minutes. Water started backing up, pouring over the manicured curbs and turning their perfect green lawns into murky brown ponds. The playground with the approved earth tone mulch was submerged first. Then the water reached their back porches and started seeping under their French doors. Silt, farm runoff, and sewage started bubbling back up through their floor drains. Then came the moment of truth. The water level at the base of my broken dam reached the scar I had carved into it. For a few minutes, it held. But the pressure was too much. With a deep groan that I felt more than heard, the top layer of earth gave way. It wasn't a catastrophic explosion like in the movies. It was a methodical, relentless failure. The trench I dug became a funnel, and a massive wave of captured water surged through the breach. My drone camera, which I'd launched when the rain started, caught the whole thing from above. The surge ripped straight through the exact path they had surveyed for their Greenbelt trail, scouring the land down to the clay. It snapped a buried gas line with a violent hiss and ruptured a water main, sending a geyser of clean water mixing with the brown mud. I watched on my monitor as the flood path zeroed in on the HOA president's house. Linda Vandermeer's prize-winning rose bushes vanished. Her custom-built backyard pergola, the one featured in her Facebook posts, was lifted off its foundation and sent tumbling downstream like a toy. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The sky was a crisp, clean blue. But down in Creekside Estates, it was a war zone. The local news vans were back, but this time, the story was very different. They weren't interviewing a smug HOA president. They were filming stunned homeowners standing in a foot of stinking mud in their living rooms. This time, when they came to my gate, the reporter's tone had changed. He called me a retired Army engineer who had warned the community for months about this exact scenario. One of Linda's neighbors, a man who had laughed at me in the meeting, was on camera, his face pale with shock. "We should have listened," he said, shaking his head. He told us. The best moment came later that day. Someone in the neighborhood had taken a big piece of cardboard and a Sharpie and staked a sign at the entrance to the subdivision. In big, crooked letters, it said, "Should've listened to the damn man." The HOA board immediately started filing insurance claims. Every single one was denied. The adjusters took one look at the FEMA maps, saw they had knowingly built in a high-risk flood zone, and laughed them out of the room. My own insurance agent called me. "Jack, you're the only one up there who came out okay. The check for minor pasture erosion is on its way." It wasn't much, but it didn't matter. My property was safe, paid for, and insured. Theirs was ruined, mortgaged, and uninsured. The plan had worked better than I could have ever imagined. They had gotten exactly what they asked for. Linda Vandermeer didn't take defeat gracefully. In her mind, this disaster couldn't possibly be the result of her own ignorance. It had to be someone's fault, and that someone was me. 2 days after the flood, while crews were still trying to pump sludge out of people's basements, she called the sheriff's department and filed a complaint. She claimed I had intentionally sabotaged the dam to flood her neighborhood. She told the local news I had committed a criminal act of destruction. An older, weary-looking deputy drove up my driveway, his face etched with skepticism. He'd probably seen 100 petty neighborhood disputes in his career. I invited him in for a cup of coffee. I didn't argue or raise my voice. I just calmly handed him a USB drive. "Everything you need is on here," I said. Drone footage from before, during, and after the storm. Time-stamped videos of me complying with the county's removal order, using my own tractor to dismantle the upper portion of the dam exactly as I was told. Also, copies of every letter, every fine, and every threat the HOA sent me. I pointed out the kitchen window. "And if you look at the dam, you'll see the red marking paint still on it. Those are the lines I drew before I started the work. This wasn't sabotage. This was compliance." The deputy watched a few minutes of the footage on his laptop, his eyebrows climbing higher with every click. He saw the video of me carving the trench. He saw the video of the floodwaters hitting the weakened point and pouring through. He handed the drive back to me. "Sir, I think this is a civil matter, not a criminal one," he said, getting up to leave. "And between you and me, you've got one heck of a civil case." The fallout for the HOA was swift and brutal. The county, now facing a massive uninsured cleanup and potential lawsuits from homeowners, was in full damage control mode. They sent out a senior hydrologist, not the fresh-faced kid from the meeting, to conduct a real investigation. He took one look at my old reports, the new FEMA survey data, and the topography of the land. His official conclusion was damning. He confirmed that an uncharted natural runoff funnel pointed directly at the creekside estates, and that my earthen structure, as he called it, was the only thing that had been mitigating its effects for the last decade and a half. The story went from being a local disaster to a county-wide scandal about zoning and permit negligence. Linda's certified drainage consultants quietly took down their website and stopped returning calls. But the real power move was yet to come. With the insurance claims denied and the county demanding they pay for a multi-million-dollar infrastructure repair to the storm drains and utilities, the Creekside Estates HOA was suddenly, hopelessly broke. They couldn't pay their lawyers. They couldn't pay their landscapers. And most importantly, they couldn't pay their property taxes on the communal lands, the little parks, the walking trails that weren't trails yet, and the fancy entrance with the sign. Marty, who kept an eye on the county tax records like a hawk, gave me a call one afternoon. "Jack, you're not going to believe this," he said, a grin in his voice. "They're in default. The county just put a tax lien on all their common property." This was the opening I'd been waiting for. This was the final checkmate. I drove to the county courthouse the next day, went to the tax assessor's office, and with a certified check from my savings, I bought the lien. For pennies on the dollar, I now legally controlled all the land in their neighborhood that wasn't someone's specific house plot. A week later, the HOA called a public meeting at the local high school auditorium. Everyone was there. Angry homeowners, news cameras, county officials. Linda Vandermeer stood at the podium, trying to spin the disaster. She blamed the developer. She blamed the county. She blamed the historic rainfall. She blamed everyone but herself. When she finally opened the floor for questions, I stood up from the back row and walked to the microphone. "Ma'am," I said, my voice calm and clear, echoing through the large room. "You keep talking about rebuilding, about the future of the Greenbelt and the community aesthetic. There's something you should know." I held up the tax lien certificate. The Creekside Estates HOA is delinquent on its property taxes. As of 9 o'clock yesterday morning, I am the lien holder for all communal properties in your subdivision. A confused murmur went through the crowd. "That means," I continued, looking directly at Linda, "that your Greenbelt is cancelled. The entrance sign now sits on land I control. You cannot rebuild, resurvey, or even replant a single blade of grass on any of that common land, unless I sign off on it. And I can assure you, I will not be signing off on anything." The room erupted. People were yelling, shouting questions. But Linda just stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief, then rage. "You can't do this." She screamed into the microphone, her voice cracking. "You did this. You targeted me. This was all a personal attack." The crowd, which a few months ago had laughed with her, now turned on her. A man in the front row stood up and pointed a finger at her. "Personal attack? We elected you to protect our property values, not lead us into bankruptcy and ruin." Someone else from the side shouted, "We're paying mortgages on houses full of mud because you wouldn't listen." The public humiliation was total. Her power, built on a foundation of clipboards and condescension, had crumbled to nothing in a single public moment. She was left standing alone at the podium, a villain in a story she could no longer control. Even after the public meeting, even after losing control of the common land and the trust of her neighbors, Linda Vandermeer couldn't accept that she'd lost. Her obsession with the Greenbelt, with winning, had curdled into something desperate. A few nights after the meeting, one of my motion-activated cameras pinged my phone. I pulled up the feed and couldn't believe my eyes. There, in the grainy infrared image, was Linda and her silent contractor buddy, hauling metal fence posts and rolls of wire off his truck. They were trespassing on my land, not far from the creek bed, trying to hastily install what looked like a cheap flood fence under the cover of darkness. They were still trying to control the water, still trying to prove me wrong, even after all the devastation. I didn't yell. I didn't go out there myself. I just picked up the phone and called the sheriff's office. I told them there were armed trespassers on my property attempting to perform illegal excavation. I might have exaggerated the armed part, but a man with a heavy steel post driver could do some damage. 2 deputies arrived in under 10 minutes. Sirens off, lights out. They caught Linda and her guy red-handed, digging holes on land that wasn't theirs. When they couldn't produce a single permit or document giving them permission, they were both arrested. The final charges were trespassing with intent to damage property and illegal excavation. The humiliation was complete, captured for posterity in the county's public arrest log. With Linda facing criminal charges, the last nail in the HOA's coffin was hammered in. I hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense guy Marty recommended, and filed a lawsuit against the Creekside Estates HOA for defamation, citing the news interviews where Linda called me a criminal and a threat. It was an open and shut case. Faced with my mountain of evidence, the letters, the videos, the public records, their lawyers advised them to settle immediately. The HOA's remaining funds were used to pay back my original $14,000 fine, all my legal fees, and a handsome sum in damages. The money wasn't the point, but it was a nice, clean end to the battle. The county, eager to move past the scandal, officially updated the FEMA flood maps using my original 15-year-old hydrology reports. My dam, the one they'd called a mud pile, was officially redesignated on the new maps as a historical private flood mitigation structure, and granted protected status. No one would ever be able to threaten it again. The Creekside Estates Homeowners Association dissolved a month later. They simply couldn't function without money, land, or a leader. At a final, somber meeting in that same community center, the residents voted to restructure into a voluntary neighborhood watch. The rules about mailbox colors and trash cans vanished overnight. People started talking to each other again, not as enforcers and violators, but as neighbors. A strange thing started to happen. The same people who had laughed at me now started showing up at my gate. One of them was the man from the meeting who'd had the "should have listened to the damn man" sign. He was a carpenter by trade, and he offered to help me rebuild my old workshop, the one I'd lost all those years ago. Others joined him. Over the next few weekends, a small group of them, a plumber, an electrician, a few guys who were just good with a hammer, helped me put it back together, better and stronger than it was before. They didn't want anything for it. They just wanted to make things right. As fall settled in, I took a bag of seeds and walked out to the dam. The scar from the backhoe was still there, a pale line across the top, but the earth was healing. I knelt down, just as May used to, and pressed new wildflower seeds into the soil. Bluebells, Indian paintbrush, black-eyed Susans. The circle was closing. I sit on my porch now most evenings with Buddy, watching the sun set behind the hills. The creek is quiet again, just a gentle trickle over the rocks. The new workshop stands strong, smelling of fresh sawdust. Across the way, the houses of Creekside Estates are still there, repaired and repopulated by people who now understand the power of the water that flows beside them. Funny thing about nature. It doesn't care about your rules. It doesn't care about your covenants or your certified consultants. The only thing it cares about is whether or not you respect it. At the end of my driveway, there's a new wooden sign Marty helped me carve. It's simple, and it's the only rule that matters on this land. It says, "Creekside Wildflower Reserve, in memory of May." She would have liked that.